Welcome to Money on Tap. Money on Tap, your personal finance headquarters, where we bring out the professionals' experience and some fun in what we call three-dimensional investing, utilizing insurance, brokerage, and fee-based planning. That's what we do on this show. We look at all sides of the issues, and we bring a fully independent planning perspective to the table.
Welcome. You're listening to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brashaw, joined here once again with Dan Micklon. How you doing, Dan?
Doing really good. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing good. We got an interesting show for you today. This show is kind of outside of our norm a little bit, I would say. We're talking about successful millennial retirement. I mean, say that 10 times fast. But I think the interesting part about this show is it's going to drive some questions for multi-generational perspective. You know, parents looking at their children and kind of helping them through this. You know, millennials kind of figuring out how retirement's going to look and work for them with all the different moving parts that are unique to their generation. Dan and I are not millennials, which is I wish I was a millennial now because I'd be a little younger.
Not too far off.
Not too far off. But you're listening to Money on Tap. We're going to jump into that show here in a little bit, but you can reach us at 855-226-8551. You can also email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com because we believe it's all about your money. But today, as we dive into this show, I think the pieces that we're going to talk about will really drive some conversation. I think some healthy conversation in the world around us because we have a lot of clients that do come in and talk about their children and ask us to speak to their children or meet with their children, or their children are just starting to think about retirement. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the struggles that current generations are having, kind of entering the retirement workforce, some of the things that are holding them back, and where we can potentially help them, leverage themselves forward.
I think one thing that, in preparing for the show, I think we both probably realize is that, the vast majority of our planning audience are baby boomers, right? So they're that generation that are either near to or in retirement as we speak. And often when they talk about their kids, who are often millennials, they're still kind of not necessarily taking care, but it becomes clear that they're doing the planning on these people's behalf.
Yeah.
Right. And they're not at the table. They're not having the conversations with us, which is a problem. Right. So I think what this show is going to be about is either if you're a millennial yourself listening or the parent of one, it is time to begin considering taking the reins and bringing them into the circle anyway, at least with the conversation around planning and, with this, as we'll describe here, historic transfer of wealth that's going to be happening here between now and 2030, and how to best steward that money into the next generation.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, Dan, when you say, the millennial child is not sitting at the table with us, the financial planner. I mean, I can't tell you, I can think of a number of times and people specifically saying, well, I want to open up a retirement plan for my son or daughter, or I want you to give them a call for me. And I know that they're probably more responsible than that, but their focuses are different. But I think what's really interesting is some of the research and information that we gathered, why that even exists, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I think that generation generally gets a bad rap of being unable to do this for themselves, but the reality is they make the majority of our workforce, and they're competent people, and they're moving along. So, I don't know what the misperception is that these parents maybe have. But it's anecdotal, but we'll talk to them. I've talked to clients who are, we're going through a budget analysis, and they're still paying their kids' cell phone bills. And I'm like, what? Well, how's the child doing? And they're like, oh, they're doing great. They got this fantastic job, and they're making. And I'm like, well, why are you still paying the bills? Like, I don't get it. But we run into that stuff all the time. So, this dependency issue, I think it's a little bit of a two-way street.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting to think that I paid for my very first cell phone bill myself. My parents were not offering me.
That's a fact, yeah.
Yeah, so, but I was also the generation that cell phones were discovered.
Yeah.
But when you when you really think about all the different pieces going on there, we could say the word Nintendo and that will hit 4 or 5 generations of names. But if I start saying the word Atari, there's only a couple people that are going to know what I'm talking about.
I got stuck with Coleco. So.
Okay, there you go, Dan. So we're dating ourselves pretty well. So there's a lot to be had there. But before we get into that portion of the show, we have for you money in the news. Now, first up, and our Money in the News segment is something where we like to bring kind of current events that are relevant to understanding investing, what's out there, and how things are impacting the marketplace around us. And, one thing about our Money in the News first article today is it's about Disney. And I think, most everybody knows who Ron DeSantis is, the governor of Florida at this point. If you don't, you might want to get to know him.
Yeah, we'll be seeing a lot of them lately.
Yeah, we'll be
soon.
And we'll probably be seeing him in 2024, either as the candidate or a mate of a candidate. But the fight over Disney. So Disney has been this kind of long-standing, self-providing entity in the middle of Florida, running its own ship. I mean, building its own road systems and providing its own bus systems, building its own infrastructure. They don't have to speak to the counties or any of the information out there, that we would traditionally do in constructing anything in this country. They have a free-for-all in this world of Disney.
Yeah, and they have for a long time. And, it's amazing. They're the single largest independent employer in the state. They employ 80,000 people, which I thought was astounding. It is a world and an economy in and of itself, really. But they've benefited from that, and they've had this kind of extreme set of privileges and arrangements from the state of Florida for a long time. Well, what was interesting to find out, though, is there's like 500 other communities in Florida that get the same exemption. They're obviously on a much smaller scale, but this is a pretty common thing down there, which I was completely unaware of, to be honest.
I mean, everyone knows Disney's running free reign.
Yeah.
we get that. They've done a good job at managing that. But the question is how is this going to play out tax-wise? I mean, there's conversation and concern that there could be a 20% tax hike among the people that between 2 counties. So 2 counties is where Disney's located. They don't pay the taxes there, but this whole absorbing of Disney into a traditional system may increase taxes by up to 20% in the people in those counties.
It's a national spotlight issue. It's very much political, and it's rooted in educational provisions and things that were to be taught in the schools. And Governor DeSantis obviously took a kind of conservative hard line against a lot of that and enacted some legislation which would prevent some of the more controversial topics from being discussed in the school system, which you think would be along the lines of a state's rights to do. But Disney voiced some significant objection to that. And that kind of kickstarted this whole thing of Disney's most favored status in the state.
Yeah. Well, this whole discussion of the woke political craziness that exists in our country right now creates a lot of sides of people. That's complicated, but it also hits the pocketbook pretty hard. I mean, Disney has seen a $63 billion market capitalization loss since March.
Yeah, so it's significant.
It's huge. I mean, people are definitely removing their pocketbook from where their assets were. So Disney has just absolutely tumbled in its stock value. There's a lot of really good things about Disney, but there's definitely a piece of Disney that's broken, I think, and it's not hearing the community. It personally is how I see it. And that's scary. And honestly, for people who have spent time at Disney like we have, I wouldn't say we're a Disney family, but we've been there a few times. It's sad to see the fact that you have to moderate what your children intake with an organization that's designed for children, essentially.
This is a place where I'd hope would have stayed kind of out of that political arena. I mean, some of the simple things, like they're no longer going to greet people with welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, because that's not inclusive enough, which to me just seems crazy a little bit.
Crazy a lot for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a polite slogan. To take it to that extent of these changes that they want to undergo, kind of adapt to this woke culture, I just think that these things are unnecessary. And unfortunately, what's bearing out to be the case is it's not good business.
Yeah, well, that's a lot for Disney today. I mean, this article from the New York Times, Gulia Hayward brought this to us. And I think there's so much political stuff around this. And I think one of the things you'd learn from this is that when these companies start really engaging specific cultural struggles, whatever the world is struggling around, when you embrace this one side or the other instead of just kind of staying out of it, buyer beware. I mean, stay away from the stock. I mean,
the country's at just such a divide. It's call it 50-50. It might be off by a couple shades of points in either direction, but why alienate half of your customer base or something?
Or maybe
so
more than half of your customer base.
Just step away from it. Just don't take a position. But what's also kind of funny, those couple well-known conservative states have all raised their hands and said, come on in, Disney, we'll take you. So,
yeah, right.
80,000 employers, or employees rather.
And then they'll framework some laws around woke, and they're not stupid. I think it's interesting too. Disney's considering bringing, maybe even bringing back Bob Iger and kind of changing the guard. And I think if Disney hasn't learned their lesson to just be quiet, shut up, and do what you do, and do it with inside the family arena healthy,
I mean, this political dispute, the people most likely to pay the price, at least in the near term, are the residents of those two counties.
Yeah.
They're going to get hurt first here.
All right. Next up, we have an article here from Fox Business. Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, breaking down the cost. Do you want to talk about this, Dan?
Yeah, so this is, obviously something else that's in the news pretty much on a daily basis. And it was a big campaign promise, and that's one of the things that certainly helped usher Biden into the office is, many, many people out there, millions of us have student loan debt.
That or a box of ballots. But go ahead.
Legally registered ballots? Those are the ones you're talking about?
No.
So the price tag with this, though, is astronomical. And at a point in time when we're dealing with the inflation that we have and the printing of money and all of the stimulus programs, just this general outpouring of government dollars into the economy that we've experienced with due need relative to the pandemic. But, at some point, a little fiscal responsibility needs to come into play and kind of turn the spigot off. But what they've estimated is that this plan, at least the kind of the higher end iteration of it, would cost $321 billion of total expense to forgive all of the student debt nationally, which is just an astronomical figure on top of all the other expenditures that we've gone through. But one of the things that, as we're going to dive into the millennial story, a lot of people think is a core issue for millennials in their financial planning and retirement planning specifically, relative to the generations before and after them, is that they unduly bear the weight of student loan debt more than anybody has in the past. So that's factoring into kind of everybody's financial outlook. But the way this kind of forgiveness would impact Americans at large is widely disparate to favor people who are wealthy. I mean, if you think of what that cost is, it's going to be spread amongst the tax base of the entire country, of course. But not everybody either goes to school or takes on debt to do it. So that would just naturally be unfair to people who chose not to go to college, therefore never took on that debt, but would be handed the bill to offset, those who had. And we don't even know how many of them did so successfully or even graduated, or there's no grade requirement. So it really is kind of a free-for-all giveaway.
Well, we can't keep pushing money and all this money down the road. We can't push debt down the road, whether it's the national federal debt, whether it's, student loan debt. Eventually, debt catches up with you, and you have to address it. The lack of health inside understanding, acquiring the debt and owning it. The financial burden of the student loans alone should not be a government issue. I mean, if you choose to get education, you get education beyond that. I mean, it's been that way forever.
It was a voluntary individual decision going in. I think it should be the same going out.
Yeah.
Is really what it is. Now, they've talked about, some ways to do it that factor in the current economic state of the potential benefactor here. And, to a certain degree, some of that could make sense. But, what they're looking at now is household income under a certain limit, whether it's 125,000, it's been floated 75,000, so if there's some kind of mid-range approach to it, it may be something that I'd be open to. By comparison, they say if they erased it all, it'd be $321 billion in cost. But if they dropped it down to people whose household incomes remain under 75,000, the cost is basically halved down to $182 billion, which is still too much.
I mean, 1 out of 6 people carry student loan debt.
There really is a lot of people, but what about those 5 who are going to, ultimately pay for it too? So
right, you sound like 1 out of 6 sounds like almost everybody, but when you put it that way, 5 out of 6 don't. Well, I agree. Don't pay. So next up, we have an article here with from CNN, Matt Egan. Rate hikes are here. What does it mean for you? I think the inflation story that we keep talking about, and it is relevant, and I think we have a show here coming up. I think we're doing that next week, right, Dan?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
We're going to talk pretty heavily about inflation, managing your assets and kind of getting ahead of inflation maybe, or at least staying with it or trying to. It's a complicated conversation, specifically because, we're at the highest inflationary rate since 1982. I mean, that is a scary fact. I mean, I think when I think about inflation and what we're going through in our economy, I think this will be the story our kids will talk about back in the 20s, and not the 1920s, but back in the 20s. Remember when inflation was at its highest peak? We're gonna hear those things. We're gonna hear about. Remember when gas prices were so high? I don't think we've seen the height of gas prices yet, personally.
No, I mean, the supply chain issues persist, and the war in Europe is ongoing, and so there really hasn't been any resolution to any of those issues. So supply and demand in energy in particular, and raw materials and minerals of all kinds is going to continue to be a problem. And, you can't produce goods without it. So how that doesn't continue to impact inflation doesn't really make sense. So I think for sure that's part of the story coming forward. But what the article hits on is that we haven't been through an expected rate-raising environment like this since 2015. And, they've scheduled in, I think they had 1.92% of additional rate hikes expected here between 2022 and 2023. Now, that seems like a lot coming from zero. But one of the kind of points of the article is, historically speaking, though, we're still in a relatively low-rate environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the statements by Joe Brasulis, which is the chief economist for RSM US, he said, "Money will no longer be free." And I think the idea that borrowing money at a rate so low that it's just kind of inconsequential that you even have a loan rate, which is what we've been living with, honestly. I mean, my first home loan, I think, first time home buyer, I think it was like 6.5%.
Yeah,
I mean, anybody can get a loan under 5 or about 5 right now. So. I mean, that was, and people used to say to me, like, that is the lowest rate I've heard of in years, So I think it's hard to quantify how free money has been, and we won't really understand that until rates really hit some excessive levels. The Fed raising rates, I think, we've heard 4, we've heard 6, we've heard everything from a 0.5% in each raising event to a half, a quarter, half, or 2 halves. And I mean, but every 1%, they raise it, right? So if they do 50 basis points, which is a 0.5% this coming up, and then another 50 basis points, that's at least a 1% rate you're going to see as an interest rate on any mortgage.
It is, but we don't have to go too far back. I mean, just as soon or as early as 2006, the Fed rate was at 5.25.
Yeah,
and we're not even at the end of this scheduled hiking of rates that's on the board here with the Fed right now. Will still only be half of that.
Well, and I think that when we break down all these different pieces, and I know their whole goal is to deal with inflation, raise rates, slow inflation down by just making things more expensive to borrow money. I mean, but I don't think this really works. I think because of COVID, I think the demand is pent up demand, not that demand is just rising. But I think demand has been rising. It's been growing. Our GDP has been strong. So we've had this rising demand, this shutoff of provision, and now we have this pent-up demand upon the normal rising of demand. I hope you're following me. But I don't think that this is just inflation to be inflation. I think this is to be expected, and I don't think the rate raising in this scenario drives as much outcome as they're hoping for. And what a lot of economists are talking about is the idea that if they raise rates too hard, too fast, not only will they, inflation will still continue because there's still this pent-up demand that has to be fulfilled. Like there's cars literally waiting for chips to be done, like that demand will actually potentially cause, a recession. You've got this demand. You've got rates so high that people can't build infrastructure. They can't provide to overcome. I mean, they're talking about building. I think about this, and it's just it seems silly to even say it, but they're talking about building factories in the United States to make semiconductor chips. because they need them so badly and the price is feasible. I mean, we make these things in other countries because it's so inexpensive to do it and ship them across the ocean.
Yeah.
Right? So that's how much demand there is that the United States would become a manufacturing location again because people are willing to pay that much money for it. So when you think about that in the background, at the end of the day, I think the Fed's efforts will less control the inflation and more send us to a recession where people don't buy anything anyways. So the pent-up demand will be caught up, but then there'll be no demand because everything's so expensive.
And that's why they keep talking about the soft landing, which, generally speaking, all the pundits you read say it's an impossible achievement. It just isn't going to happen.
Yeah, agreed. I think they need to take I think whatever approach, they need to take less bigger steps and allow things to just dribble into the economy instead of just, it's like it's going to be like a massive tsunami in our economy. That's how I really think about it. Boy, well, that's going to do it for Money in the News. You can reach us at 855-226-8551. Or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. Stick with us. We're going to be right back to talk about successful millennial retirement and how that's going to work in a multi-generational scenario. This is going to be a great show. Stick right with us. We'll be right back.
Do you have an annuity? Do you understand exactly how it works and when to use it? The likelihood is that you don't, or maybe you bought it a while ago because at the time it sounded like a good idea. But will it accomplish your goals? We are here to help you. Contact us about a free annuity review and learn what your annuity does, how it works, and how it can best help you with your retirement goals. It's absolutely free to you, and if there's a better way for you to accomplish your goals, this is a great way for you to learn about those opportunities too. Take the time to get educated, get empowered, make your retirement a success. Call us at 855-226-8551 or info@yourmoneyontap.com.
Now back to Money on Tap with Ben and Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brayshaw, joined here again with Dan Michelon. We're both financial planners and partners at Brayshaw Financial Group. And Seth Cressman, who's normally on the show with us, has been out for probably a little over a month now. Yeah. He is recovering well. Thank you for your prayers and contact on that. We're hoping to have Seth back here soon. He is working, but unable to really join us on the show at this point. So looking forward to having him back. We miss Seth on that side. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. Have to take care of some of that housekeeping for people. We love to hear from you. Please give us a call. We have a lot of information, people that have enjoyed just getting just general help. We'd like to make sure that people are cared for in lots of different ways.
One other thing to add about that inbox is, a lot of the questions we get, we respond to individually and address people's concerns that way. But if you have something you'd like to hear us talk about on air, a topic for conversation here, feel free to send that along as well. Because if it's on your mind, chances are it's on others' minds. And, that's, we're here to bring information. So best bet is not what we think you need to hear. It's what you tell us you need to hear.
Yeah.
We're happy to do that.
And we will send you a small token of appreciation for that too. Today we're talking about millennials having a successful retirement. I think that's one thing that's on the minds of a lot of parents out there. And there's a portion or a group of millennials that do come in. But we do find that there's kind of this in between where we joked around about that, mom and dad say, can you call my son or daughter? Or I'd really like to open up a retirement account for them. They're not even anywhere to be found. But there's a lot of there's a lot behind that and why that exists. I think one of the things that I thought was interesting in reading this article we found in Forbes, Dan, I give you credit for finding this because I thought this was this brought clarity a little bit to me, and I'm going to quote this. It says, "There's never been a group of people that has changed the financial industry views how the industry views them, quite like millennials, a generation that has seen major technological advances and economic developments within their lifespan as a group. They have caught between traditional financial values and a contemporary lifestyle that is vastly different from the generations before them. Now, this article from Lizzie Chapman from Forbes, I think she brings up some really well-languaged, perspective on the fact that, when I was a kid, my parents taught me how to use a checkbook. Like, we didn't have a computer. Like, I remember the first computer. So, but we learned how to do a checkbook. I learned how to use all of, sheets and like everything was hand done. Like, if you got a
longhand math, you did it by hand.
If you had a calculator, like, you were a rich family. So, I mean, it's kind of funny to laugh about, but there's a lot of our listeners realize that's the way it was, but that's not how it exists anymore. I mean, I don't check my bank account by looking at my bank statement. I check my bank account by logging online on my phone that I carry in my pocket when cell phones didn't even exist when I was a kid. So the world has changed so vastly, so quickly, but here's this group of people who are now the largest workforce, as you had mentioned earlier, in the country that do things completely different than everyone else has ever done and have not learned traditional financial methods or thinking that was been brought up for generations because the world's changed so greatly.
And the perception around that is, well, they must be incompetent or unable to do so, but it's not the case. It's just done differently.
And I'm not saying that that's not true for some. There's a lot of parents that might say that's the case, but right. It's really not. It's just a different way of managing finances, looking at finances, and so forth. So for those who are wondering if you're a millennial or if your child is a millennial or your great-grandchild's a millennial, those are the people born between 1981 and 1996. And they became the largest generation over the baby boomers. And they're now the largest provider of the workforce in our country, which is, potentially, sarcastically people say is a problem. But they're also the people who are going to receive the largest wealth transfer in history from their parents who were baby boomers.
Yeah, it's $68.4 trillion by 2030 is the estimate, which is obviously just a massive amount of wealth.
Right. Which is, for me, when you do simple math and you say, hey, we owe $30 trillion as a federal debt, it's no wonder that, estate taxes start at 50% over whatever the estate tax exclusion is, right? So that's why no one wants to make it permanent, because right before the big wealth transfer, I think we're going to see that number drop way down so our government can try to collect half of those dollars and wipe out that debt. Now, that's an interesting thing, but people, dead people don't vote. So after your money transfers, your kids are just happy to get something.
You sure about that?
Yeah. Good point, Dan. So, so as we go through this and building a successful retirement and giving you kind of some of that background, we've got 6 points to go through here today. Kind of the first one, I think the obvious one, I'm going to turn this over to Dan, but the first one is start saving.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this a lot, particularly in the kind of employment retirement setting. The vast majority of jobs these days offer 401k or 403b or 457, alternatives to the pension that an employer used to provide that baby boomers quite honestly benefited from. That's one of the kind of stark differences in planning between the generations is, the employer used to do a lot of that work for you. Now it's you're kind of on your own to do it. But what the statistics tell us is that, 55% of millennials are eligible to participate in a retirement plan. In the next couple generations, Gen Xers is 77%, and 80% of baby boomers were eligible there as well. And this is speaking to the pension system, but only about 24% of them are actively participating. So they have this opportunity in front of them that they maybe lack the training or haven't been taught to take advantage of. But it's the simplest first step in terms of getting prepared for retirement is to make sure you engage what's out there. Start contributing.
Yeah. And that flows right into number 2, which is going to sound very much the same, but it's, start investing. And investing is not just the retirement plan. I mean, people need to open up accounts in which they are providing for long-term value. Like there's limitations to your retirement plan. You can't. There's only so much money you can put into them. Government limits all of that, and there's limitations to that. But it's also kind of interesting because we have a generation of young Americans who have seen their parents actually lose money on real estate until only recently in this last 12 to 24 months.
Yeah.
Like real estate had dipped so far down after 2008. People were selling their house in the initial phase of the baby boomers from 2007 retiring were losing money on homes that they had purchased, thinking it is usually the largest asset they own. But then all of a sudden they were losing money on an asset that they've been paying for years. Now, did they net dollars out of it? Yeah, but less than they had put in. And so
less than they planned to get.
And less than they planned to get. But now we've had this complete reversal and this huge kind of like, right before the tsunami, right? All the water washes out to sea, and all of a sudden you could see all of the seabed. But then the tsunami comes flying back, and that's basically what happened inside the real estate marketplace. And so millennials hadn't seen value in real estate. Now, COVID, people didn't want to get stuck in the city. Now there's a huge demand. This money is now flowing outside of the city. And what are we seeing? We're seeing home purchases at record rates. I was talking to somebody the other day. Rates are up, 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 up. And someone said there was 40 offers in the first day of a house going on the market under $500,000. I was like, that to me, that's just astronomical. I mean, to hope you're the person you get that house. Of course it's going to be paying for overvalue. But investing is way more than your 401k.
Yeah, to that point, between January and now, mortgage rates on average went from 3% to 3.75%. So you would think that would stifle the market a little bit, but home values have appreciated 15% in the same period. It's insane. It really is.
It is, and honestly, you just don't even know what people are going to buy and why. It's just investing is something that has been weighed down in a lot of ways, and mostly because of student loan debt, the fact that millennials have a perspective that they might inherit a large sum of money. There's also the idea that that investing outside of it has not been something that their parents have been successful at. I mean, they say that, I can't remember the exact statistic, but if you're like out of the top 4 or 5 or 6 days of performance of the stock market, your return goes from the average 9 or 10% historically to like 2%. And they've seen their parents invest in the stock market, and guess what? They didn't make any money. Why? Because people get out when the market looks bad. They get in when it already recovered.
Yeah, we've done a show on this, but the best thing you can do is just be in. And just ride it out, stay in the market is generally what's going to give you the best statistical chance at a positive outcome. For example, we have the stat here that if you start investing in a retirement account at age 30 and you average 9%, which is what the S&P has done since 1957, a little better than that actually, about 10.5%, you need just to invest $370 a month to accumulate $1 million by age 65. So that's not a substantial amount to save. That if you trust the market and allow it to just kind of ride, history tells us that you have a pretty good chance at achieving a successful retirement.
So you're talking about like $80 a week, right? $80 a week. Save that every day from your age 30 to 65, and you got $1 million.
Yeah.
But $1 million doesn't get you much, Dan.
Well,
it sounds like a ton of money, but if you're going to live, maybe, because the other issue you have here, right, which is what millennials are scared of, which is the big item, is that their Social Security is going to taper off by the time they hit, 2034. The Social Security statement says that. Sometimes it says 2033, and then sometimes it says 2035. But I guess it's just however the money's flowing there with the Social Security Administration. But with that, they have real fears, and they know that, hey, that $1 million sounds like a lot of money, but in 35 years from now, that might be equivalent to $100,000 today, based on inflationary rates and everything else we're looking at.
Today's inflation, it would be, yeah.
And I might not have Social Security. That's a fear that people have. So you start going through all these things, and they actually report that the anxiety that millennials have about finances is astronomically high.
Could be true, and I think that's all relevant, but the answer certainly isn't to save less. So if you don't think $1 million is going to work for you at age 65 based upon how old you are today, then that just means you got to save more.
Agreed. And I mean, with inflation, things cost more. They're spending, 60, 70% of their income on living. Are they being frivolous or not spending? I mean, some parents will say, oh, we lived off a lot less when we were your age. But the cost to live today is different. What people pay for today is different.
And certainly what people expect to do with their lives is also different.
Yeah, agreed. That could be pro or con. So, thirdly on our list, we have buying proper insurance. Now, we've done a number of shows on insurance. We've talked about the need for life insurance, but there's disability insurance. There's there's just general term life insurance. There's investment kind of life insurance, whether you're a whole life or an indexed universal life. Getting into some complicated words there. But if you want a permanent version of insurance that you're going to actually try to build cash in what we call rich man's Roth, we've done shows on that. That's been a very popular thing for people who make make a decent living, especially the millennials, because when you go over $144,000 of income, which might be a reasonable tech salary today for a computer science kind of person, you can't contribute to a Roth if you're a single person. Yeah,
and one thing, the kind of the older end of the millennial generation at this point is 40, 41, 42 years old. So a thing to consider about this insurance program or as an alternative for savings and for retirement benefits is that, hopefully at this point you haven't encountered any of those really serious medical issues. You're still young enough, theoretically healthy enough to secure that kind of top rating in the insurance world.
Yeah.
And so it's an important thing to recognize that and take advantage of it while you can, because once those certain diagnoses hit as you age, that opportunity kind of leaves you. So one thing that we can do, that's a strategy we've suggested, if you don't have the money to fund the retirement plan-like version of the insurance, there is this notion of convertible term, where we can lock in your insurability today at a significantly lesser cost because it's only term insurance without that value. But when your financial picture dictates that you potentially have the opportunity to put more money in, you've already secured your health rating.
And that's an interesting perspective for a lot of people because they don't realize how easily your health condition will change. I mean, we talk to people, one day they're healthy and the next day we're getting a call from the spouse and they're saying, so-and-so just had a heart attack or just had a stroke. And I mean, we've seen the number of people who even in their 40s having more heart attacks and more strokes recently ever since the COVID events. So, there's a lot of fears around that.
I mean, just taking a simple statin or blood pressure med can increase your cost of insurance by 15%.
Yeah.
You're generally a healthy person. It's just the fact that you have these prescriptions in your record can have an effect.
Yeah. And so getting that kind of your insurance ability to keep that at the lowest rate possible and locking that in and covering family or future family, super relevant to today. The other thing is car and auto and home, bundling those together, huge savings. People don't really realize that. They have a friend they buy auto insurance for. That friend's busy, doesn't really do much. You just keep paying the bill. All of a sudden you buy a house, you're not talking to them, Now you got home insurance because you got to get that done right before you go. Sometimes you call that person. Sometimes your realtor says, call this person. We have to have it done today. And now you have two different policies. You might be able to save a lot of money that way. Usually you do. So that brings us there. So number 4 for our millennials, this is where we're starting to get into some real depth. Understand your short and long-term financial goals. When we were talking about, the different topics we wanted to cover in this, we didn't use the word build, your short and long term. It's understand, because there's an emotional connection to it. It's not like your goals, your dreams, all of that. That's kind of an innate scenario. That's built into who you are as a person and where you want to be. And I mean, we've met everybody who wants a mansion on an island to, they don't care if they live in a trailer in the woods, in retirement. I mean, it's just, it is what it is. Everyone has their own perspective on that dream. I think what is really interesting is that, the idea of building short and long-term goals is not the same as just understanding who you are and what you really want. And that's some introspective work that's involved.
Yeah, I mean, everybody is different, right? So all these projections and software and the tools we have, they're all kind of fixated towards an average outcome or making the numbers work. But people's goals typically aren't articulated to us in numbers. It's more of a vision of where they want to be, how they want to live, things they want to do for their children, things they want to do for their parents, and it covers all generations. Those are the things that we need to have the conversations around, right? So we kind of start with that, and then the numbers will essentially work themselves out, or that's where we come in to take in those account values and performance expectations and all those things and say, okay, this is what we think is reasonably close to your goals and where we can get you, or, if some either changes need to be made or different type of advice needs to be offered, we'll do that. But, come in aiming high, come in understanding what you hope your future looks like.
Yeah, so we're going to take a quick break here. We have 2 more items to cover, and I'm really excited about those because I think we're going to start diving into a little bit more of what you're talking about, Dan, there. You're listening to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brayshaw. This is Dan Mickelon. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. Don't go anywhere. We're going to talk about the importance of how to make all of these things successful in retirement for millennials. We'll be right back.
Call us today at 855-226-8551 and get your free consultation with Ben Brayshaw or Seth Crossman or any one of our partners and find out what's going on in your plan, your estate plan, your financial plan, or what you're planning at all, if nothing. Get it fixed, get it right, get it done today. Give us a call at 855-226-8551.
Now back to Money on Tap with Ben and Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brayshaw. I'm here with Dan Mickelon, and we are talking about millennials accomplishing a successful retirement. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. Dan had mentioned earlier sending us any ideas for shows. We're always interested in what people want to listen to. We've had a few really good ones come in, and I think it's great if we can kind of expand on what our audience is looking at. As we kind of dive into our final segment here on millennial retirement, there's kind of a different way that millennials look at things, kind of a do-it-yourself, a DIY or DIY, mentality. Like, I'm going to open up a Robinhood account. I'm going to start trading options, and I'm going to make all the money I need, and I don't really need help. I think that's kind of like, taking an X-ray of your own body, figuring out if your bone is broken, and saying, I'll cast it myself. That's actually how I perceive it. But Dan, add to that.
Yeah, I think part of it's inherent in this adoption of technology that we talked about before, right? Everything's at your fingertips. It's all so easy. So there's that tendency to do it because it's easy to do and it's available to you. But there's also, from the kind of professional advising perspective, there's a lot of things that we've seen in our recent past, at least leading up to the new year, that would kind of harken you back to the tech bubble days, right? When everybody was day trading, not on their cell phones, but on their PCs at home, and quit their jobs because everything tech went up, and it was great until it wasn't. And then you had a lot of prematurely retired people in a big crunch, right? I kind of sense a little bit of that going on here, and it's felt like that. But I think the market has really begun to correct itself. And that's where this notion of doing it yourself on your cell phone because you read something on Reddit and, you got the stock tip of the day from God knows who or where or why. But, the need for that professional advice and maybe some guardrails and some understanding and a little bit of education becomes important. That doesn't mean you can't continue to do it yourself. We always welcome that, and we like people to bring ideas from an investment perspective to the table. But understanding properly, the risks and realities of that is just critically important.
Yeah, agreed. And so our number 5 is, hiring a professional. One thing that millennials really need to figure out how to embrace is hiring a professional and why you would hire a professional. And I think you made some really good points there, Dan, on that. And we have kind of 3 sub-points in why to hire a professional. The first item that a professional brings to the table that a millennial potentially does not have access to, like, because 30 years ago, you'd have to call your broker, at some wirehouse, have them make the trade because you decided you wanted to buy XYZ stock, And so that doesn't exist anymore. And the simplicity of trading has made it seem like anyone can do it. And when the market's good, you don't need any financial professional. So let's take that issue off the table. And I think that's kind of where we're coming from here. Why to hire a financial professional is really, number one, the strategy around investing. Because it's not necessarily what you buy, it's how you buy it. And that's the part that nobody can bring to the table unless you have the planning background to provide. I mean, the simple example is understanding taxes and what tax bracket you're at today and what you're going to be at in the future, and whether you should do an IRA or a Roth for that simple of a reason. Like, how much income do you make? Should you be doing this? How does that, how can you manipulate your income legally to get it low enough so you're in a lower tax bracket that a Roth makes even more sense? Like, these are strategy conversations that exist inside having a financial professional.
And understanding, probably at a level higher, well, if you have an after-tax investment account and you have your retirement account, pre-tax, where to execute a given trade, it matters. It has significant tax implications. It matters for, the risk tolerance and the suitability of either account. It can be different. So you might not want to day trade and buy options in your IRA, right? It might be safer to do index funds and
let's start with you shouldn't.
Right. So those kind of simple things where, like I said, I think I used the terms guardrails before.
Yeah.
Where we can just kind of define the purpose of the different accounts, give you a little bit of definitional background as to what the tax implications are from a gain or a loss on either side of that coin, and just putting you in a better position to still take some of your own actions, still come up with your own ideas, still be an educated investor, but do it in the safest places and ways possible.
I think even for a financial professional like myself, I mean, Dan, I've asked you to look at my portfolio to give me some outside perspective, because sometimes we all get too emotionally attached to XYZ stock, right? I mean, I'm like, hey, Dan, I really think Dan's looking at me like, you got to get out of that one.
I'll fall in love with my stocks, but I won't fall in love with yours.
Exactly. And so we talk about this stuff because we have a perspective that's not emotionally connected. And that's really, really important, because it brings us to, kind of our sub point number 2 or B, is to match your investments with your goals. We kind of get lost sometimes and need a corrective path. Like, those guardrails exist so that when you're driving a car and you start veering off the road, the guardrail catches you before it's so permanent of a loss that you're protected. Like, those guardrails are there to protect the absolute scenario.
It might wreck your car, but you're not going to fall off the cliff, right?
Exactly. And I think that's where, when we talked about number 4, understanding your short and long-term financial goals, when you bring those goals to the table and start matching them up with the investments, and whether you're on track, you're not on track, or the type of investments you have are never going to get you there to begin with, or how you're handling this. Do you even have the guardrails? Do you have the insurance in place that if this happens, there's a guardrail there to protect you? That's really, really important, because only a financial professional can really give you an opinion that is something you can understand, has all the perspective you need to make sure you're cared for.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing that's, I think, worthy of note there is, our opinions and the advice we offer is monitored, and it comes from an educated background, and where, we have serious liabilities and issues with that advice. So we need to do it well, versus some guy on a blog who says, buy this today or short that today. They have we're fiduciaries. No skin in the game.
We have to take care of you. That's,
right.
That's the job of that's when you come first. So that's really, really important to make sure that we understand that what your goals are. And I always tell people, if we present a plan, and if I present a plan to somebody and it doesn't sound good to somebody, I always tell people 1 of 2 things happened. Either I didn't hear you or you didn't communicate. Right? Because our job is to find the plan that matches up with what you want. So we kind of go through this, and we have this whole kind of song and dance of how many times we meet, and how much time we're going to do, and the process we go through, and all of those things, so we can try to really understand what you're trying to accomplish for exactly the reason of matching your investments with your goals.
Get to that point about, was the communication in a conversation clear? And it was, either end of the table hearing what the other
Are we
side
talking
was
about
saying.
the conversation I had with my wife? Because I know that was clear, but she doesn't think so.
There's lots of those. But an old advisor was kind of a mentor to me. He told me once that when he would run into that situation where he thought he'd made a set of recommendations that was really good or really fit the client, but he was getting a no across the table, or there's some lack of understanding. He said, the easiest way to bring that conversation back to center is to then ask, well, if not this, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So if you don't like what I have to offer, what's your plan here?
Yeah.
And generally speaking, 80, 90% of the time, there wasn't a plan.
Right. Or you uncover another story, a conversation, a fear.
It just keeps the conversation going so you can get to what that issue really is.
Because we don't really care. Well, I don't care what people want to invest in or buy. We do all of it. So what does it really matter at the end of the day? We're here because the next, we've been in this business for 20 years. We're going to be in this business for another 20 years. And you know what? We got a long history to maintain the work we have done, build the history we are going to continue to do. We just want to have you happy. I mean, that's the ultimate goal of, I would say, the majority of financial planners out there. Whether they're good at what they do doesn't change the fact that their goals are to make you happy.
And that's point C, is a quality outcome, right? So, to your point, Ben, I don't care if we take our left or our right today, as long as we end up where you told us we were supposed to end up.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
The road is the one you want to travel. We're just here to drive the car. And so I think to create a quality and to quantify the outcome as well, to make sure that that's going to, when you arrive at your destination, hey, listen, everything's in place to solve that problem, is probably the quintessential reason for a millennial to hire a professional instead of just day trading and buying options and opening your Robinhood account and figuring out which stock you're going to buy tomorrow when the market's going to go down again. I mean, we watch CNBC and Fox Business. I mean, we watch these things constantly. We are in it every day. And honestly, it's not easy. So if you're sitting there trading your own stock or your child's trading their stock, I had a client call me. He said his son was all happy one day. He made $150 or something in some stock he bought. And the next day he was upset because he lost like $300. It's like his whole mood had changed. That's just gambling. That's all it is.
That's not investing.
So, number 6, close us out today. There's a big piece here that a lot of millennials are missing. And this is the one that probably will quantify our value as financial planners the most for them in their pocket. And that's the intergenerational wealth planning. A lot of millennials are going to receive these trillions and trillions, $68 trillion coming through. And there's really good ways to receive those monies, and there's really bad ways to receive those monies. And I mean that in a tax fashion. There's ways to mitigate taxes, manage taxes, alleviate taxes through that entire process. So if you are a millennial listening to our show, I would encourage you to call us, because if you know there's a generational event coming, we can potentially mitigate issues, because once someone passes away and the event's happening, pretty much the government's written those guidelines from that second on.
And we hear it from the other perspective too, not the millennials due to inherit this wealth, but the people that own it today. I've often had people come to the table and say, well, I'm going to use what I got, and whatever's left, good for them. And I'll always bring it back, well, if we could do it better, why wouldn't we? And if we can bring in your kids and have them benefit from it and truly take your life's work and not set up one generation but two.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we do that?
And it all comes down to just understanding what you have, how it's set up, how the estate planning's done. And we've got attorneys, we've got people in the business. We do estate planning for our clients on the financial side. I mean, bringing that all together in a nice box, makes the tax burden significantly less on your children. I haven't met a parent who even has a spendthrift child who's saying, I really hope the government gets my money instead of them.
I was just thinking, I've never put the national debt on a beneficiary form.
Yeah.
I've never signed one of those or had a client sign one.
As much as they're upset that Johnny just is going to blow this money away, Johnny's still getting it.
Yeah.
And how much can we get Johnny? So, that's the kind of thing that matters the most. Well, that's going to do it for us today here at Brayshaw Financial Group and Money on Tap. We appreciate you. Thank you for joining us. You can reach us at 855-226-8551. I'd encourage you to reach out if you have estate planning needs in that capacity and retirement planning. That's what we do. We're here for you. You can email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. We hope you make it a great week. We look forward to talking to you next.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of this radio station and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. No strategy, product, material, or tool mentioned can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information, products, materials, or tools mentioned should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. This show may be subsidized in whole or in part by a product sponsor or issuer. Securities and advisory services offered through SagePoint Financial Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC, and a registered investment advisor. All other services offered through Brayshaw Financial Group LLC are independent of SagePoint Financial. SagePoint Financial and Brayshaw Financial Group do not provide tax or legal advice. Main office is located at 116 South River Road, Bedford, New Hampshire, 03110, and can be reached at toll-free 855-226-8551.